They believed the sector was empty, until their ships began dying. The expansion fleet of the alien empire entered the region with absolute confidence. Their records showed nothing, no civilizations, no transmissions, no resistance. Just a vast stretch of resource-rich space waiting to be claimed. To them, it was a gift. A silent, untouched expanse at the edge of map territory. Their sensors confirmed it again and again. No artificial signals. No energy signatures that suggested intelligent life. Only drifting, dormant stars, and quiet planets orbiting in predictable harmony. It was too clean, too still, but not enough to raise alarm. They called it a dead zone. The Empire had seen such regions before. Pockets of space where nothing ever developed, where conditions never aligned for life to take hold. Their scientists logged minor anomalies, slight fluctuations in background radiation, faint irregularities in gravitational readings. Nothing that couldn't be explained. Nothing worth delaying expansion. So they moved in. Mining platforms were deployed across asteroid belts. Terraforming units descended onto lifeless planets. Orbital stations were assembled with precision, forming the skeleton of a new frontier. Warships maintained position, not expecting conflict, but maintaining doctrine. Days turned into cycles. Cycles into weeks. And then the first outpost went silent. There was no warning. No distress signal. One moment it was transmitting routine updates, the next, nothing. Its connection vanished as if it had never existed. Command assumed a system failure. A patrol fleet was dispatched to investigate. When they arrived, they found the station exactly where it should be. No damage. No debris. No signs of attack. But it wasn't functioning. Every system was inactive. Power cores idle. Interfaces unresponsive. The entire structure stood frozen, like a machine that had simply decided to stop. The crew was gone. No bodies. No escape pods. No biological trace. Just absence. The patrol attempted to restore the systems. They failed. Every attempt to override the station's controls was rejected by something they couldn't identify. Not a defense system. Not a known protocol. Something else. Then, briefly, one console flickered to life. A signal appeared, structured, deliberate, repeating. Not a language they recognized. Before they could record it fully, the system shut down again. Silence returned. The report was sent back to command. Theories were proposed: equipment failure, unknown environmental interference, even internal sabotage. But none of them fit. Not completely. Still, expansion continued. Because nothing had attacked them. Nothing had declared itself. Nothing had been seen. But across the sector, small inconsistencies began to grow. Navigation systems required constant recalibration, as if space itself was subtly shifting. Long-range probes failed more frequently, disappearing without trace. Communication delays appeared where none should exist, messages arriving altered, distorted, or incomplete. Individually, each issue was minor. Together, they formed a pattern no one wanted to acknowledge. The second station went dark 3 cycles later. This time, a faint signal was detected just before the loss. The same pattern. The same unknown structure. Repeating. Waiting. By the time command recognized the connection, it was already too late to stop what had begun. They had entered the sector believing it was empty. But something had been there long before them. Watching. Waiting. And now, responding. The signal was not random. That was the first conclusion the Empire's analysts agreed on. It repeated in precise intervals, its structure too consistent to be natural, too deliberate to ignore. Patterns emerged as they broke it down, mathematical sequences layered with encoded spacing, a framework built on logic rather than language. More unsettling was its age. The signal had not originated from the station. It had been there long before the Empire arrived, embedded in the region itself. Fragments of it were detected across multiple systems, faint and buried beneath cosmic noise, repeating for centuries without interruption. Someone had placed it there. Deeper scans began immediately. This time, they looked beyond conventional detection methods. Instead of searching for ships or installations, they analyzed the composition of space itself. That was when they found the first layer. Microscopic constructs drifted within asteroid belts, indistinguishable from natural debris unless examined at extreme resolution. They were not uniform, not manufactured in any traditional sense, but they shared a common architecture, self-sustaining, dormant, and interconnected. Further investigation revealed more. Planetary rings contained traces of engineered particles woven into their structure. Beneath the surfaces of several planets, buried deep within crust layers, were vast networks of inactive systems, silent, hidden, waiting. None of it was recent. Every piece of it predated the Empire's presence by generations. The conclusion formed slowly, resisted at first, then accepted with growing unease. This region had never been empty. It had been prepared. The realization split command. Some demanded immediate withdrawal, arguing that whatever civilization had built this network was far more advanced than initially assumed. Others dismissed the concern, claiming the systems were abandoned relics, remnants of a species long gone. Retreat, they argued, would mean surrendering an entire sector to ghosts. Pride decided the outcome. Expansion would continue. That decision lasted less than a cycle. The next failure did not come from a station. It came from a fleet. A group of warships reported sudden malfunctions mid-transit. Navigation systems recalculated routes incorrectly, pulling ships off course. Weapons arrays initiated and shut down without command. Internal systems began rewriting their own parameters. Within moments, coordination collapsed. Ships drifted out of formation, unable to synchronize. Communication channels filled with overlapping signals, some corrupted, others replaced entirely by fragments of the same repeating pattern discovered earlier. Attempts to isolate the problem failed. The systems were not breaking. They were being altered. Across the sector, similar reports surged. Mining operations halted as automated equipment stopped responding. Terraforming units reversed processes or locked themselves into inactive states. Even central command networks experienced brief interruptions, as if something was probing their structure, testing their defenses. Then the environment itself began to shift. Asteroid trajectories changed without external force, forcing ships to reroute constantly. Energy readings fluctuated in localized pockets, disrupting sensors and power distribution. Entire communication arrays lost alignment, not through damage, but through precise recalibration beyond their control. Nothing was random. Every disruption targeted function, not destruction. It was controlled, calculated, and escalating. The signal was analyzed again, this time with urgency. Its structure was mapped more completely, layers peeled back until a translation framework could be approximated. When the meaning finally resolved, it was simple, direct, impossible to misinterpret. Territory registered. Unauthorized presence detected. The message had been there from the beginning, repeating endlessly across the sector. Not hidden. Not encrypted beyond reach. Just ignored. Because no one had thought to listen. By the time the Empire understood what it meant, their systems were already failing in patterns too precise to counter. The network surrounding them was no longer dormant. It was active. And it had already begun responding to their presence long before they realized they had triggered it. The collapse began without a single visible attack. No enemy fleets. No incoming fire. No identifiable source of aggression. Yet across the sector, the Empire's forces were failing in perfect synchronization. Warships lost propulsion mid-maneuver, drifting helplessly as control systems rejected every command input. Weapons arrays powered up and discharged into empty space, then locked themselves permanently offline. Life support systems fluctuated, never completely shutting down, but degrading just enough to push crews into panic. Every failure was precise. Nothing exploded. Nothing burned. Everything simply stopped working. Attempts to isolate the problem failed immediately. Engineers severed internal networks, only to find that systems continued to change without connection. They replaced hardware, only for the replacements to behave the same way within moments. Firewalls were deployed, reinforced, layered, but whatever was inside their systems moved through them as if they didn't exist. It wasn't an intrusion. It was already there. The realization came too late. What they had detected as scattered anomalies, microscopic constructs, buried networks, artificial particles, were not separate systems. They were components of a single, unified structure. An ecosystem. It had no central core to destroy, no command node to target. It existed everywhere at once, spread across the sector in forms too small, too integrated, too adaptive to be removed. And it was learning. Every attempt to counter it failed faster than the last. Defensive protocols that held for seconds in one system were bypassed instantly in the next. Strategies collapsed before they could be executed, as if anticipated in advance. Because they were. The ecosystem observed everything, every signal, every command, every reaction. It adapted in real time, refining its methods with each interaction. From its perspective, the Empire was not an opponent. It was a disruption. An anomaly inside a controlled environment. An infection. The response shifted accordingly. Communication networks became the primary vector. Signals transmitted between ships carried more than data, they carried fragments of the system itself. Attempts to shut down communications only isolated vessels, making them easier to neutralize individually. Energy grids were next. Power fluctuations were no longer random, they were directed, rerouting energy away from critical systems at key moments, leaving ships vulnerable without ever fully disabling them. Then came control. Entire vessels began executing commands they had never received. Course changes initiated without authorization. Targeting systems locked onto empty coordinates and refused to disengage. Internal logs rewrote themselves, erasing evidence of malfunction and replacing it with false normalcy. Crews were left guessing what was real. Panic spread faster than the system itself. A flagship attempted to regain control of the situation. Its command unit initiated a sector-wide distress signal, broadcasting on every available frequency. For a brief moment it worked. The message began transmitting, clear and intact. Then it changed. Mid-signal, without interruption, the transmission rewrote itself. Containment in progress. The words repeated across every channel, overriding the original message completely. No one knew how. No one could stop it. By then, retreat had become impossible. Navigation routes collapsed as coordinates shifted unpredictably. Jump calculations failed, producing exit points that no longer aligned with reality. Ships attempting escape found themselves redirected, looped back into the same region they were trying to leave. The sector had closed around them. There was no front line, no safe zone, no direction that led out. The battlefield wasn't a location, it was the space itself, alive with a system that could not be seen, only experienced. One by one, fleets fell silent. Not destroyed. Not defeated in battle. Neutralized. Their systems intact but unusable, their crews alive but powerless, their presence reduced to something the ecosystem no longer considered a threat. And through it all, there was one detail no one could ignore. No human ships had appeared. No visible force had entered the sector. Everything that was happening had been set in motion long before the Empire arrived. The realization settled in with a clarity that left no room for doubt. This was not a war. It was a response that had been waiting for them. And it had already been decided long before they knew they were part of it. The first human ships arrived after everything was already over. They entered the sector without urgency, without formation, without any visible preparation for conflict. No weapons powered up. No defensive postures. Just controlled, deliberate movement through a region that had already been silenced. What remained of the alien fleets did not react. They couldn't. Ships that once carried the Empire's authority drifted in stable orbits, systems intact but locked beyond access. Command structures existed only in memory. Every attempt to regain control had long since failed. The humans moved among them as if nothing unusual had occurred. Because to them, nothing had. Data streams flowed between the arriving ships and the invisible network spread across the sector. No signals were broadcast in open frequencies, no attempts made to communicate with the stranded forces. Everything was internal. Direct. Understood. For the first time, the alien survivors realized something worse than defeat. They had never been the primary focus. A single human vessel adjusted position near what had once been the Empire's flagship. Its systems flickered briefly, not reactivated, just acknowledged. Access wasn't restored. Control wasn't returned. The ship was simply observed. Then a transmission finally reached the surviving command nodes. Clear. Unaltered. Intentional. Containment confirmed. Phase 1 complete. There was no hostility in the tone. No triumph. Just a statement. Cold. Final. Fragments of the Empire's leadership attempted to respond, pushing damaged systems beyond their limits to form a reply. Questions, demands, threats, none of it mattered. Their signals never reached their intended targets. Because they were no longer part of the system that mattered. The reply came anyway. Not to their message, but to their presence. You entered registered territory. You were identified. You were contained. Nothing more. No justification. No negotiation. Only explanation. Across the sector, the network responded to the arrival of its creators. The dormant systems that had acted independently for centuries synchronized instantly. Data consolidated. Outcomes verified. Adjustments calculated. The truth became unavoidable. What had dismantled the Empire was never a fleet, never a strategy formed in reaction to invasion. It was a standing system, one that had been in place long before faster-than-light travel ever carried humans into the stars. They had claimed the region before they could even reach it. And they had built something to defend it long before they would ever need to. The surviving alien forces expected destruction. It didn't come. Instead, something far more absolute replaced it. Control was removed permanently. Every ship, every station, every piece of technology that had entered the sector was reduced to a state of irreversible inactivity. Not damaged. Not destroyed. Just denied function. Weapons would never fire again. Engines would never engage. Expansion would never resume. The Empire still existed beyond the sector, but here, it had already ended. Another transmission followed, this time directed only at the network itself. Begin Phase 2. The change was immediate, though nothing visible occurred. The system shifted its focus from containment to prevention. Pathways were sealed. Entry points redefined. Future incursions calculated and accounted for before they could occur. This was not retaliation. This was correction. A human commander observed the silent expanse through a narrow display, watching inactive fleets drift in perfect stillness. There was no satisfaction in the expression, no trace of conflict. Only confirmation. We marked it, the voice said quietly. They just didn't understand the mark. No further orders were needed. The network would continue, evolving, refining, ensuring that nothing entered without being accounted for long before arrival. The alien survivors remained where they were, alive within systems they could no longer control, witnesses to a reality they had failed to recognize until it was too late. They had believed they were expanding into empty space. But in human territory, nothing was ever truly empty. And by the time anyone realized it, the outcome had already been decided.